Crochet 101, all about yarn. There aren't a lot of supplies required to crochet, but your yarn is probably the most important one. So let's take a look and see what our options are. Wool is a type of fleece, specifically the fleece from sheep. It's one of the most popular types of yarn. Your choices include lamb's wool, that's wool that comes from a young lamb's first shearing, merino wool, which is one of the finest of the fine breeds, pure new wool or virgin wool, that's wool that's made directly from animal fleece. It's not recycled from a previously made wool garment. Shetland wool comes from Scotland, Shetland Islands. The Shetland Island sheep are very hardy. They're pretty small, but it's really good yarn. Icelandic wool is a really rustic, soft type of yarn. And then there's washable wool. This is wool that's been treated either chemically or electrically, and that destroys the outer fuzzy layer of fibers that can pill up on it otherwise when you go to wash it. Other types of fleece that you may come across are mohair, which comes from an Angora goat, cashmere, which comes from a cashmere goat, and then Angora, which comes from Angora rabbits. And please do not believe all the crazy PETA ads that are out there. If you are getting Angora from a reputable US dealer, you are getting wool that has been harvested very humanely. The fact of the matter is, if you do not take that wool when it is released from your bunny and take it away, they will try to groom themselves like cats, but they can't make fur balls the way a cat does. So they actually end up dying if they're not groomed properly and have that wool taken. And so it's really not only humanely harvested, it's good for the rabbit as well. Other natural fibers that you may come across that they make yarn out of include silk, cotton, linen, and rayon. Just be aware that these natural fibers can be kind of slippery, smooth, and they often have a kind of a shiny look to them. Of course, there are the synthetic yarns. Those are nylon, acrylic, polyester. Acrylic is a very, very popular choice for yarn. A lot of things are made out of acrylic yarn, but be aware it does not absorb water well. So if you're wanting something that is going to be absorbent like a dish towel, you're going to want to use a natural fiber. There are also plant-based fibers made out of soy, bamboo, corn, other materials. I haven't had a chance to work with any of these yet, so I can't tell you a whole lot about them, but they are out there. Then there are the novelty yarns. These are really cool looking yarns. People love them, they're drawn to them, they're funky, they're fun, but please be aware they can be very tricky to work with. These are not yarns for beginners. Identifying any individual stitch when you're trying to figure out where you went wrong is almost impossible. So if you make a mistake, you're kind of in trouble. So wait until you have some experience before trying the novelty yarns, but they are a lot of fun. Ribbon yarns have a ribbon that's knitted right into the rayon or a rayon blend. Boucle, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, is like a really bumpy textured yarn. It's got a bunch of loops in it. Chenille is really tricky to work with, but it's got a beautiful appearance, velvety texture. There are some yarns that are thick and thin. They kind of alternate between very thick sections and very thin sections. It gives a real bumpy look to the finished work. Railroad ribbon has tiny tracks of fiber that are strung between two parallel strands of thread. And then there's faux fur, which is fluffy fiber strands that are on a strong base thread of nylon, and they resemble kind of a faux fur when they're worked with. Really pretty stuff, but again, this is not for beginners. And there's also a lot of other kind of specialty type yarns. They're more traditional than the novelty yarns, but they do create some really nice looking looks. There's tweed that has a background color. It's got little flecks of fiber in different colors with it. There's heather, which is blended from a whole number of different colored or dyed fleeces that are then spun together. That is really pretty. There's marled, which is also called rag, and it's a plied yarn, and each of the plies that are twisted together are different colors. Gives it a really nice look. And then something a little bit more common out of the specialty yarns is variegated. And this is dyed with several different colors or shades of a single color. And once you've gotten the basic hang, it's probably one of the first specialty type yarns that I recommend branching out into. It can make it a little hard to find your mistakes sometimes, but it's much easier than most of the others, and it gives a really rich look to the finished product. Now that we've talked about the different kinds of materials that yarn is made from, let's talk about the different types of weights of yarn, because this is going to be very important when you are looking at a pattern to make sure that you have the right kind of yarn to do your work. So the lightest weight yarn is lace weight yarn. This is labeled with a 0. It is the lightest yarn you're going to get. It's commonly used for things like tablecloths, doilies, making lace, and so on. If you're using metric size hooks, a steel hook would be 1.6 to 1.4 millimeters. That would be appropriate. A regular hook would be a 2.25 millimeter hook. And then if you're using the US sizes, the steel hook is a size 6, 7, or 8, and a regular hook would be a B1. So be aware that sometimes people will use larger hooks with this to create kind of an open lacy pattern, but these are just the general rules or guidelines that'll help you pick the right size hook to go with your yarn. The next size up is the super fine weight yarn. This is marked with the number 1. It's also called a fingering yarn or a baby weight yarn. It's commonly used for things like really light layette items, socks, and so on. If you're using metric size hooks, it'll be about a 2.25 to a 3.5 millimeter hook. US size hooks are going to be a B1 up to about an E4. Next up, we have the fine weight yarn. This is a number 2 weight yarn. It's also called a sport weight or a baby weight. And now is when you say to me, wait a minute, I thought that yarn that was labeled a 1 was a baby weight. Yeah, and so is yarn that's labeled a 2. We like to confuse people. What can I say? This weight yarn is usually used for things like light sweaters, baby items, accessories, so on. If you're using a metric size hook, you'll probably want to look at something that's from a 3.5 to a 4.5 millimeter. US size hooks are going to be anywhere from like an E4 to about a 7. Next up, we have the lightweight yarn, which is labeled with a 3. It's also called a light worsted weight or a DK or double knitting weight. It's commonly used for sweaters, other garments, lightweight scarves, and so on. Metric size hooks, you'll be looking for something 4.5 to 5.5 millimeters. US size hooks anywhere from a 7 to like an I9. The most common weight of yarn is the medium weight yarn, the 4. It's also called a worsted weight yarn, Afghan weight, Aran weight. It's really commonly used. It's what you're going to see the most of on the shelves. It's commonly used for sweaters, blankets, hats, scarves, mittens, you name it. It's a very nice weight of yarn for many things. Metric size hooks you're going to use anywhere from like a 5.5 to a 6.5 millimeter. US size hooks are like an I9 to a K, like 10.5. So that's what you're going to be looking for on the shelves most of the time is a medium weight or worsted weight yarn. Going up in weight again, now we have the bulky weight yarn. This is labeled a 5. It's also called a chunky weight, a craft weight, or a rug weight. It's commonly used for things like rugs, jackets, blankets. It's a little heavier, tends to use a larger hook. It works up a little faster, so if you're going for Afghans, this may be the way you want to go. Metric size hooks are going to be a 6.5 to about a 9 millimeter. US size hooks, you're looking from that K 10.5 up to about an M or 13 number for your hook. Now we come to what we call the super bulky weight yarn. It's labeled a 6, and this used to be the largest size yarn that the Yarn Council recognized. Not anymore, and we'll get into that in a minute, but the super bulky weight yarn, really thick. It's also called roving. It's commonly used for heavy blankets, rugs, sweaters, etc. You're going to use metric size hooks anywhere from 9 to 15 millimeters in size. Your US size hooks are going to be an M, 13, up to about a Q. And we now have what's called the jumbo weight yarn. It's labeled a 7. I haven't actually seen any of this yet, but the Yarn Council is now recognizing it. It is also, just like the size 6 called roving, commonly used for heavy blankets and rugs and so on. And you're definitely going to want your biggest crochet hooks for these. You're going to want a metric size hook that's at least 15 millimeters and a US size hook that's at least a Q. These are big hooks for big yarn. Okay, now if you're looking at your label for your yarn, you're going to notice a bunch of funky looking symbols on there. If you're the kind of person that actually reads the instructions inside your clothing labels, you may recognize some of these. Otherwise, you do laundry like my kids do, and you just throw it in and hope for the best. So these might be new to you in that case. So this first one is called Machine Wash Normal. It's about as basic as you get. Both of these symbols stand for machine wash in cold water. Both of these symbols stand for machine wash in warm water. And then all of these symbols stand for machine wash with hot water. And as you can see, there's different temperatures of hot. Is it kind of hot? Is it medium hot? Is it really hot? Basically, all of these, though, are hot water safe. Then we've got a couple of special machine washing symbols. That top one is machine wash on the permanent press cycle. And the bottom one is machine wash on a gentle cycle. Now, if your yarn has any of these symbols, it should not go in the washing machine. It needs to be hand washed. The first one is just a general hand wash. It doesn't say what temperature. Second one on the top is hand wash cold. And we go down to the bottom, we've got hand wash warm and hand wash hot. So you can see they pretty much line up with the same symbols for the machine wash, but these have to be done by hand. Then these symbols will let you know if the yarn is safe to be dry cleaned. This plain circle means yes, dry clean. It doesn't really give you any details. The A means you can dry clean with any solvent. The F in the circle is dry clean, but use petroleum solvents only. And then the P is dry clean with any solvent except trichloroethylene. Why they have F and P for these, I have no idea. They do not make sense to me, but there you go. Now we've got some symbols that tell us if we can use bleach. The triangle on the left says yes, use bleach whenever it's needed. The one on the right says use bleach, but make sure it's a non-chlorine bleach when needed. And obviously don't use bleach if you don't have to. It's going to stress the fibers and wear it out faster. Okay, so now we've got some drying instructions. We've washed it, now we need to dry it. So at the top left, tumble dry, normal. No big issues there. Top right, tumble dry, normal, but make sure you use a low heat. Bottom left, tumble dry, normal, medium heat. And the bottom right, tumble dry, normal, and it can handle a high heat, so go for it. Okay, we've got some more tumble dry symbols. That one on the top left is tumble dry with no heat. Top right is tumble dry using your permanent press setting. And on the bottom, tumble dry using your gentle setting. Notice that the same number of lines as they have for the washing machine for permanent press or for gentle. Some other symbols you may see for drying. On the top left, we've got line dry, so make sure this gets hung on the clothesline. It does not go in the machine. None of these symbols can go in a dryer, okay? The top right needs to drip dry. The one that's on the bottom left, that means it needs to dry laying flat. And then the one on the bottom right means it needs to dry in the shade, so don't go hang that one in the sun, okay? So now that we've washed it and we've dried it, the question is, can we iron it? The symbol on the top left says, yep, go ahead and iron it. No real details there. Top right, iron it, but please use low heat. Bottom left, iron it with medium heat. And the one on the bottom right, iron it, go ahead, use high heat, it's not going to hurt it, go for it. Okay, now please notice that all of these symbols have big X's across them, which means do not do this. Okay, top left, do not put that in the washing machine. Top right, do not dry clean it. Bottom left, do not use bleach. Bottom right, don't put it in the dryer to tumble dry. We've got some more don'ts. Top left, don't dry. Now I'm assuming this means don't dry it in any kind of a machine or with any kind of heat, because obviously things are going to dry eventually one way or the other. Can't possibly mean that. The one on the top right is don't wring it out. You're going to make the shape get all wonky. Bottom left is don't use steam from your iron if you're going to iron it. And the bottom right is don't iron it at all. Okay, so now you know a lot more about yarn than you ever knew there was to know. Something you're going to notice when you're learning to crochet is a lot of the free patterns that are out there are on the sites that are owned by specific yarn companies like Red Heart or Lion Brand. you may not have those yarns available in your area, or you may not want to use them. So if you want to substitute one brand of yarn for another brand of yarn, here's some different things that you need to look for. First of all, only substitute yarns of the same weight. You don't want to use a fingering weight to make a heavy afghan. It's simply not going to work. Okay, so make sure you're matching weight to weight. If you are unsure about the weight of the yarn, if you can't tell if it's a homemade yarn, it doesn't have a gauge listed on it, do a test swatch of it. Just, crochet a little bit of it up and compare it to the one that's in the pattern so that you can see if it matches, okay? And then make sure that you're comparing the yardages on the package. Different size packages are going to have different yards. Ounces and grams are going to vary from one brand to another, but you always need the same amount of yardage to make any specific item. So make sure that you buy enough yarn. And some more helpful tips. Again, always purchase the same weight yarn that is specified in the pattern instructions. Check the yardage that is listed in the pattern. Make sure that you get that many yards because the yards per ounce can vary. Take a look at your package, see if it has a dye lot on it. A lot of like the red heart yarns that are the solid colors do not have a dye lot anymore. But a dye lot simply means that all of this yarn was dyed at the same time, the same batch, and that's why they call it a dye lot. It's a lot of made out of the same exact dye. Not only the chemical, but the temperature and the length of time it was in there can vary. So if you are buying yarn that has a dye lot marked on it, make sure that you get enough of it so that all of your yarn of each color is from the same dye lot. If you don't, they're not going to line up. They're not going to look perfect against each other. And you may have a line where you see the color go from one shade to one slightly different shade. And be aware that if you buy a dye lot today and you come back in 2 weeks because you realize you need more yarn, they may not have the same dye lot in stock anymore. It may have been sold out and you have a new one there. And there's just no guarantees it's going to look right. So if you're not sure, buy extra. Most shops will let you return unused yarn that's still in the package. If you're worried about that, check with your shop. Ask for their policies. And I hope all of this information has been helpful for you. We're going to look at the tools that you need to crochet, which are very, very minimal. You're not going to have a big investment here. And then we're going to get on to doing some actual crocheting. So you have a wonderful day.